My question to you is, what is your plan to improve the medical system?
Look, I come from the middle class. My mother was a working woman who raised me and my sister. My mother was able to finally, she saved up to be able to afford to buy a home by the time I was a teenager.
Mi pregunta es entonces,
So my question is as follows. What are you going to do to help the middle class so that the cost of living does not destroy us?
Thank you for the question and your point. Listen, I know prices are too high still. You know prices are too high still. And we have to deal with it. Here's how I feel about it. Again, you've heard my story. I come from the working class. I'm never going to forget where I come from.
Among other things, she trotted out her folksy background story again. I mean, the Americans love Abraham Lincoln's log cabin backstory, and in Australia we keep hearing about Prime Minister Anthony Albanese growing up with his single mother in public housing. But Kamala Harris can't match any of that. She can't even refer to a working class background. Now, she reckons middle class is tough enough.
I grew up a middle class kid. My mother was hardworking. She raised me and my sister Maya. She saved up, and it was only by the time I was a teenager that she could afford to actually buy her first home.
Sound familiar? We've heard this stuff almost word for word previously, and no matter what the question is, have a listen.
When we talk about bringing down prices and making life more affordable for people, what are one or two specific things you have in mind for that?
Well, I'll start with this. I grew up a middle-class kid. My mother raised my sister and me. She worked very hard. She was able to finally save up enough money to buy our first house when I was a teenager.
Yeah, the middle-class kid thing even got a run a couple of times in the debate.
I know you say that your values have not changed, so then why have so many of your policy positions changed?
I grew up a middle-class kid raised by a hardworking mother who worked and saved and was able to buy our first home when I was a teenager.
When it comes to the economy, do you believe Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago?
So I was raised as a middle-class kid.
Enough, enough. It's meaningless. But we're getting it at rallies too.
I grew up a middle-class kid. I was raised by a hard-working mother who saved up, and by the time I was a teenager, she was able to afford to buy our first home.
Now, apart from showing that Harris doesn't have a lot to say, it all becomes a bit pointless, doesn't it, when your log cabin story is the heartbreaking saga of a comfortable upbringing in a middle-class suburb. Kamala, it's okay. You don't have to be a victim.
Watch how Governor Tim Walz addressed this question about sky-high inflation.
Let's start with inflation. What do you tell people who wake up, frankly, each morning wondering, how am I going to get by financially?
Yeah, I tell them that Kamala Harris and I know something about it, being middle-class folks. Our family sit at the table trying to pay the bill.
Okay, well, that vague response has somehow become the Harris campaign's go-to answer. Just watch. It's like pulling the string on the back of a doll.
When we talk about bringing down prices and making life more affordable for people, what are one or two specific things you have in mind for that?
Well, I'll start with this. I grew up a middle-class kid.
I grew up a middle-class kid. My mother was hardworking. She raised me and my sister Maya. She saved up, and it was only by the time I was a teenager that she could afford to actually buy her first home. And I know, and I identify with, I know where I come from.